I've come to look at three wells in Brecon. They're rather special wells, at least two of them are. They're not quite what we mean by wells generally, or what most people see as wells. When we think of wells, we tend to picture boreholes. There's to say a shaft sunk deep down into the ground, and then we lower a bucket in to draw the water up. These wells aren't like that at all. They're built around springs, so that the spring is induced to flow into a tank, and then people can just dip buckets in there and scoop out the water. Something to bear in mind when we look at these wells, and many of them are called holy wells, is that there is a great tradition dating back at least to the time of the Iron Age and the Bronze Age, that places where water comes from the ground, and rivers and lakes, are seen as portals to the underworld where the gods live. And that if you want to communicate with the gods, if you want to make a sacrifice or give them something, perhaps in exchange for a favour they can do you, then you can deposit stuff in rivers. In London there's an awful lot of archaeological material, swords, helmets, shields and so on, which has been fished out of the Thames, and it's believed that they were given their depositions as ritual sacrifices. It's a tradition that still lives on, actually. The well behind me is known as the wishing well, and I'm sure we're all familiar with the idea of the wishing well. In 2006, a financial marketing agency issued a report called the Fountain Money Mountain, and they discovered that 1 person in 5 in Britain gives money regularly to the gods in this way. That is to say, they routinely cast money into fountains, wells and rivers in the hope of gaining good fortune. So the tradition of making sacrifices to the gods of the underworld in this way is still lingering on in this country. Let's have a look at this well in some detail. It might remind some viewers perhaps of the hermit cells they're often seen in Ireland. It looks like a little chapel or a hermit cell, but actually it simply covers the entrance. Here is the entrance to where the spring gushes forth from the ground. It comes down from Penna Creek, the Iron Age hill fort which rises above here. It really is an ancient well, an ancient building. No one quite knows how old it is. There is a stone with the date 1754 on it, but I'm inclined personally to think that was the date of a repair rather than when this well was actually constructed. Within living memory, young women that wanted to be lucky in love used to cast pins into this well as a form of a symbolic sacrifice. In the Iron Age, men might cast swords into the river or into wells. These days it's been reduced to pins. The overflow from the pool, which is fed by the spring, runs along here. There's a channel that leads to a small bathing pool, of all odd things. Anyway, this, I fancy, is something well worth seeing. It's called Mandi, by the way, which means in Celtic black stone, and it's hypothesised that it had a connection with the hill fort. Perhaps you can catch a glimpse of it up on the hillside there. Anyway, that's the well of Mandi. Now we're going to move on and visit the Priary well, which is only a stone's throw from the cathedral. And here we are at the Priary well, which, as you can see, is still not really what we think of today as a well. It's not a borehole. Instead, it's simply a local spring coming out through those two holes. It's been guided out into a pool beneath. It's very wet here. You can see that the hart's tongue ferns are growing actually in the spouts there. This particular well would have served the whole priary, and there's plenty of water elsewhere, as you can see. It's been very wet lately. This is a very ancient well. I'm guessing, I was speaking earlier about wishing wells, I'm guessing that almost everybody watching this has thrown a coin at some time or other into a well in the hope of gaining good fortune. We're going to go on now to another well, one which is practically unknown, except to people that actually live round here. I stumbled across this well quite by chance. There you can see the bridge which carries Castle Street across the river up to the castle. You can just see that a little bit perhaps in the distance. Up here is the original keep of the castle, with some slight remains of the oldest part of the castle on it. But here are some steps which lead down to the river, and purely out of curiosity I decided one day to walk down and see what was there, and this is what I found. This too is a well. You can see the water is flowing from a stream, and the overflow from the well goes down to the river there. I haven't been able to find out anything at all about this particular well, and I haven't seen it mentioned anywhere, although some local people know of its existence. The water looks particularly clear there. What the story of this well is, I couldn't begin to say. Anyway, that's about it. That's 3 wells of Brecon, and all of them very interesting. There are 1 or 2 others. There is a well which has, well, it was thought to have the property of healing eye disorders. It's called the Eye Well, unimaginatively enough, and that's up in the Priory Groves. A lot of these wells were thought to have minerals. They were thought to have, well, in the Middle Ages and in Celtic times, they were thought to have magical properties. Later on, the minerals were thought to be healthful. It's wells like this that gave rise to spa towns. You know, we've got towns like Bath, which has a spa, which is simply a stream emerging from the ground. And the waters from that are thought to be very healthy as well. The spa towns of Britain are part of that same tradition of holy wells and wells which have magical properties. Anyway, it's quite lovely round here. That bridge, as I say, carries Castle Street from the centre of town up to the castle itself, and the river is in full flow at the moment. There's been a lot of rain lately. I shall probably be making videos on this subject at other times. It's the middle of winter now. Perhaps I'll start making some videos during the spring and summer about these holy wells, because I've only mentioned very briefly about them. There's a good deal more to be said. They tie in very much with the mythology and the religion of the Celts, and there's a continuous line between the behaviour of the Celts and their views of the properties of wells and springs and our own belief system. All of this predates Christianity. As I say, some of these wells became known as holy wells, and they were associated with saints and with Christianity. But the idea that they were holy or sacred in some sense long predates the arrival of Christianity in Britain. It's part of a much more ancient tradition, into which I shall delve in the future perhaps.